Hi team. There is no evidence that proves consciousness is generated by the brain. That comes as a surprise to a lot of people. We assume that's been proven. But it's not. It's never been proven. Neuroscientists have never found the area or even the activity of the brain that gives rise to consciousness. And let's just remember, consciousness is the awareness of being, the awareness of experience. Are you conscious now? Are you aware that you exist? Are you aware of the experience that you're currently having? It's that awareness that is consciousness. Now, I think this doesn't get nearly as much attention as really it should be getting. Because the idea that consciousness is kind of generated by the brain, or is somehow in the brain somewhere, it's like a part of the brain, is taught like it's a fact. It's not a fact. We've assumed that. It seems that way. It appears that way. But just because something appears a certain way, if we're being good scientists, if we're being scientific about things, we can't just rely on the way something appears or say, oh, well, it's just obvious. We need proof. We need proof to take it from a theory to a fact. And without proof, it remains a theory. And so I think it's baffling. I find it baffling that this isn't given more attention, isn't discussed more, isn't studied more. Because this assumption, this theory that consciousness is generated by the brain, influences and informs the entire world, all of our behavior, the way we structure our lives, the way we've organized ourselves into this society and culture. All of it is based on this initial assumption. We just assume the consciousness, this awareness of being, the awareness of this body and brain. And you can do this yourself now, just checking. Are you conscious of a body? Are you conscious of a mind? Are you conscious of a world? That consciousness isn't necessarily arising in the brain. I will concede it's possible. Of course it's possible. But if we have this possibility and this theory, it needs to be proven before we say that it is a fact. How amazing is this? It's incredible. It's very liberating in itself. It's never been proven. So just checking in with yourself now, this consciousness, the awareness of this body and brain, how do you feel about the prospect that it doesn't actually arise within the brain? It's not generated by this one individual body and mind. And yet it's taught like it's a fact, and I find it quite strange. This is one area that gets hushed up really quickly. You remember questioning this when you were a child? Asking the teachers, what's all this about? What is the body and brain? What even is this? What are my thoughts? What is my imagination? What is my body? What is my mind? They just give you just whatever the predominant explanation for it all is at the time that you asked. That's just the answer they give. But let's stay with this consciousness thing. Because all the problems that we have on Earth really stem from this initial assumption. Because to believe that the body and brain generates consciousness will naturally lead to a very fearful way of living life. Because just downstream from the belief consciousness arises in the brain is the belief that you are temporary, that you are mortal, that you are vulnerable, and that you need things in order to be happy, in order to reproduce, and in order to survive. So this is a belief that is based on fear and lack, scarcity. A belief that gives rise to fear and desire. Why? Because you believe that your existence is dependent on the brain. That's a belief. It's never been proven. It's never been proven. It's a belief. So what if we overturned that original fundamental belief and, I am just the consciousness that is aware of a body and brain, body and mind. You're never actually aware of a brain, you're only ever aware of a mind. How interesting is that? It's amazing stuff. So if each individual is walking around with this belief, my existence is dependent on this brain, my happiness, my reproduction, my survival is all dependent on this brain and the brain chemistry and the physical structure of the brain. I need things and I should be afraid of other things. Then we have a society and a culture that is informed by and dictated by this belief. It's a very egocentric way of living. And our culture, the society, is very egocentric. It's all based on the individual narrative, the individual story. I need this, I fear this, I should have this, I shouldn't have that. Right? Egocentrism. We could call it. We could call the world culture. We could almost say the world religion is one of egocentrism. Because it's come to believe that this theory is true, that consciousness arises in the brain. This is a belief. As I demonstrated, it's not a fact. And so if we're believing a theory to be true, it's not scientific. It's not scientific. And the idea, it's just obvious, that's just how it is, that's not scientific at all. And yet we call ourselves like a scientifically informed culture. That's the basis for things. We follow the science, right? We trust the science, follow the science. But if we're trusting and following the science, we need to be diligent, be thorough in our investigation, in our examination. And very few people ever do this. Even very scientifically minded people very rarely do this. And yet it's so important. So important. Because this is what is generating all of the problems. This fear and this lack. To quote Ozymandias from the film Watchmen, which was originally a graphic novel called Watchmen. He said, It's obvious. This war is not ideological. It's based on fear. Fear of not having enough. That always struck me, that line. It's not ideological. The root cause of so many of these problems, it's fear and desire, and that's all. But we so rarely go to examine and investigate that original fundamental belief. You might hear, well, just because we haven't found it yet doesn't mean that it's not there. Okay, well, I concede that. But any scientist saying that, how interesting is it that that's the exact same reasoning that religious people use when trying to explain where is God? Why haven't we found God? They'll say, well, just because we can't see God doesn't mean God isn't there. Just because we haven't found God yet doesn't mean we won't find God in the future. Right? Exactly the same. If we say, well, consciousness doesn't arise in the brain, if a scientist says, well, just because we haven't found it yet doesn't mean that it's not there. Really? How's that science? Cheers. I'm not trying to insult anyone. I realise sometimes doing these videos, I'm not trying to be insulting. It's just we need a certain level of intensity and questioning, because this is important. If we're scientists, let's start there, right? Isn't the scientific method to first observe? Observe and then form a hypothesis based on what you observe. That's first step to second step of the scientific method. But let's just begin with the observe before we go to the second step, which is formulate a hypothesis based on the things you observe. But let's not go to that just yet. Stay with observe. What is the observation? Consciousness, the awareness of being. That's where all observation originates from in the first place. Observe, and then we formulate a hypothesis based upon what we observe. But how can we formulate a hypothesis based on the observation itself? Can we observe observation? Can we be aware of awareness? And can we formulate a hypothesis based on the awareness of awareness? Because if we remain within the awareness, we never go outwards then to the next sort of stage. We can't formulate a hypothesis based upon what we observe unless we first can trust the observation itself. And we can't do that unless we know what that observation is. In exactly the same way that if we were studying something through a microscope, let's say we need to figure out what a certain cell is. So what is a plant cell? We need to figure this out, so we use a microscope. Thorough, good scientific investigation also double checks the microscope. Is this good? Is this accurate? Is this an accurate tool? Can we be sure of the accuracy of the measuring equipment? Can we be sure of this? Do we know this is accurate? And in good science, there is just this margin of error. We have to concede. It's possible the equipment is giving us some kind of a false reading. What if it's the same when it comes to our consciousness, the observation? The first thing we tend to observe is the mind. That is the primary element of our experience. But what if the mind itself is like the telescope? Can we just double check and make sure that the mind itself is a good, accurate method for formulating a hypothesis? Is the mind a good tool for the job? We assume that it is, but why are we assuming that? What if it turns out the mind is a very inaccurate tool for understanding reality? The microscope is broken. That's unfair. It's not that the mind is broken, it's just that we've promoted the mind ahead of its station. We've decided that the mind should be the CEO of planet Earth, and it should never have done that. Consciousness should be the CEO. The mind needs to just... The mind's a bit overworked, right? The mind is exhausted and stressed because it's been given a job way too high, way above its pay grade, way above its ability level. The mind cannot figure out the universe. Why? Because consciousness is the universe. I'm getting ahead of myself. Just give me one moment, 1 second. Cheers. Whilst you give me a moment, whack that like and subscribe button if any of this is at least interesting. Perhaps it's useful and valid, but if it's at least interesting, help me out. Sorry to ask, but it makes a remarkable difference in helping me to grow the channel. Anyway, firstly, right, so what I'll do now is I'll go in, because positive people, healthy people, don't just point out problems and inaccuracies, they actually present solutions, right? That's how we be positive and healthy. We don't just point out issues. Again, another big problem in the world. We're just pointing and blaming. We're not just going to do that. I'm actually going to suggest a slightly different way of seeing things that might be a bit healthier and might lead to a better circumstances on planet Earth and for you, for your life, right? But if nothing else, there's food for thought there already. Just recognize that's never been proven, and it's a bit odd that this doesn't get discussed. I mean, how can we go and do anything unless we've already understood fully the actual fundamental nature of reality? How can we go out running around in the world and doing all our stuff and doing our job and getting our relationships and teaching our kids and the whole thing, the whole scenario, the whole situation? How can we do any of that unless we are beginning from a ground of truth? Because anything downstream, if we don't have that firm you can't build your house on sand, so to speak. And because we don't know the fundamental nature of reality, we're building our house on sand. This is why we feel so afraid and nervous all the time. Nobody's quite sure what's going on. And it's exhausting. It's based on fear, so we're always afraid. And it's based on desire, so we're always trying to gain something. I need something in order to be happy, in order to move forwards in life. Anyway. Again, I'm not trying to be insulting, because we've all made this mistake and still do, right? It's a natural assumption to make. Naturally, we assume things based on what we see and what we observe. Of course, it's a very natural assumption to make. That's how it appears. But just like an optical illusion, something is obvious and only appears one way until we look at things a slightly different way. So how can we start looking at things a slightly different way? Because naturally, if I'm denigrating and destroying the belief that consciousness arises in the brain, I need to come up with a new hypothesis, because we cannot deny that consciousness is there. It's one of the only things that we can say for certain. It's one of the only things that we can say for absolute certain. I mean, the famous one, Descartes, the philosopher, said, cogito ergo sum, meaning I think, therefore I am. But just thinking does not prove the I amness. A more accurate phrase would be sum, ergo sum. I am, therefore I am. It's self-evident. I am. That's obvious. There's the proof. I am. Therefore I am. In fact, we don't even need to go to the therefore. There doesn't need to be an ergo. Just sum. Sum, meaning I am. Sum. I am, I am, I am. Cogito means thinking. So, cogito, ergo sum, think, therefore I am. But if we just go to I am, therefore I am, because thinking has nothing to do with consciousness. Surprise. Thinking and cognition has absolutely nothing to do with consciousness. The mind, in its egocentric, narcissistic arrogance being the primary element of experience, assumes that it is doing all of this, it is generating all of this. But there is no evidence to suggest that thinking has anything to do with consciousness. Consciousness is the I am, the awareness I am. If there's no thought present, you still are, right? You can be without thought and still be aware without thought. And let's test this for ourselves. If you go like this now, just rub your fingers together. Okay, you're aware of the sensation of rubbing your fingers together. At the same time, you're aware of the thoughts in your mind. Right? Now you're aware of both of those things equally. Let's say there were no thoughts in your mind, but you're aware of the sensations in your hand, but there's no thoughts in the mind, just the sensation. You're aware of the sensation in your hand without thought. I am, and I am aware. But we would never say that rubbing my fingers together and generating that sensation, that doesn't generate consciousness. But there's just as much evidence to suggest that rubbing your fingers together creates consciousness as there is the thoughts in your mind. You're aware of both of them equally. Why do we assume that the thought has more to do with consciousness than the sensations in your hand? Why? Why do we do that? This is all based on an assumption. My theory is that because thought is a primary element of our experience, that's why we've come to kind of have it first and foremost, and we formulate things such as cogito ergo sum. But what if there's no cogito? Right? It's often proponents of the consciousness arises in the brain theory, and it is a theory, might suggest when there's brain damage it affects consciousness, but it doesn't. When there's brain damage it affects cognition, it affects thinking. But consciousness is the awareness of things, the awareness of being. And you might be aware of distorted cognition in the event of brain damage or illness, right? Many different states of the mind. But the awareness is not a state of the mind. The awareness is just awareness. Consciousness is just consciousness. So the brain is damaged and that affects consciousness thing as a way of proving consciousness arises in the brain. Unfortunately, that doesn't cut it either. Again, there's a lot of... I will concede that there is sort of anecdotal, circumstantial evidence that seems to point towards consciousness arising in the brain. Absolutely. Okay, fine. Conceded. But it's not proven. So we have the sensations in the hand. Now we don't say, but therefore the consciousness is generated by the hand. You know, I rub my fingers together, therefore I am. That doesn't work. I am, therefore I am. Naturally, we then have to say, okay, so where then does consciousness arise? I can only give kind of my theory based on intuition and my own meditation and learning. There's been many different suggestions, right? Check them all out. Don't just take my word for it. But the first part is a very good place to start. It's kind of eye-opening. This might begin a journey or two out there, right? I hope it does, because following this line of inquiry is remarkably freeing, remarkably liberating. Imagine it. No more fear, no more desire. Imagine. You're just free to observe a singular body, a mind unfolding in all its natural, wondrous ways. You're just gently enjoying the show, because you are consciousness. You are not the body and brain, you are consciousness. So, if I suggest, and I'm going to use an analogy that I've used before, and I love it for its explanatory power, the analogy of the moon and moonlight. Namely, how moonlight relates to the moon is how consciousness relates to the body and brain. Let's just assume and concede for a moment there is such a physical thing as a body and brain, to illustrate this metaphor and this analogy. Because, by the way, that's up for debate as well. Scientists have never found matter. That's another thing to just... We've made a big assumption, huge assumption. That's never been found either. What's the smallest element of physical matter? We've never got there. Right? And yet we're basing our entire life, our entire understanding of reality based on that initial assumption. It's a theory. So, just imagine the moon right now. A full moon, a bright moon, in a clear black night sky, shining brightly. Now, if you didn't know anything about physics and anything about science or cosmology or astrophysics, any of that, if you didn't know anything about any of that, when you look at the moon, you would assume that it's generating light. Why would we assume that? Because that's how it appears. It's a perfectly logical assumption, a perfectly rational and reasonable assumption, to assume the moon is generating its own light. Why? Because you look at it in the night sky and go, that is so obvious. It's obvious. But that's not the case. And we know now, due to the fact that we've examined and done our investigation and been very thorough about this to try and figure out, so what is moonlight exactly? And come to the conclusion and proven that moonlight is actually sunlight. Sunlight bouncing off of the moon. Now we know. So moonlight is actually sunlight. The moon itself doesn't generate light. Can you see where I'm going with this? Take a minute. Channel memberships are available, by the way, if you want to support some of my work. and gain access to my exclusive guided meditations. Thanks. I need all the help I can get. Moonlight is actually sunlight bouncing off of the moon. So what if consciousness works in exactly the same way? Consciousness isn't within the body, but our experience of life is very similar to our experience of moonlight. That actually consciousness is its own thing. I'm not even going to go as far as to say it's everywhere or universal or infinite, any of that. I'm not even going to go anywhere. Let's not even try and figure that out. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Because those are big words. We don't need them. Not really. Not yet. If you want to go there, go there. But we just stay with this for now. Experientially. What if consciousness is something completely different? It's totally its own thing, like sunlight. Sunlight isn't intending to shine off of the moon. The moon just happens to be there, and so it picks up some of the sunlight. So what if the body and brain just happens to be there, and so it's picking up the consciousness? This is why you are equally aware of the sensations in your hand that you are of your thoughts. Because consciousness isn't discerning between the two. The consciousness doesn't prefer one thing over another. In the same way that the sunlight has no real choice that whether the moon is there or not. The sunlight's just going to bounce off of it regardless, and it's quite beautiful. It's the same with the body and mind. This is where the inner peace starts to arise, because consciousness actually doesn't prefer one experience over another. Consciousness will just remain. Like sunlight is constant. So if we say, okay then, but what is generating the consciousness? Because obviously in this analogy I'm using the sun as the generator of light. Is there somewhere a generator of consciousness? Well, we don't know. We don't know. There's been lots of theories. Some might say God, some might say Brahman, some might say, well, just perhaps there's a centre. Maybe there's a centre of the universe that's generating all of this consciousness. The clues are everywhere in the physical analogies that we see, so such as the moonlight, and the fact that we can see a sun that bounces off of the moon might be a little clue. Maybe there is a centre of consciousness somewhere. Dunno. But I would suggest, and this is my personal take on this now. I'm not putting this forward as a total has to be accepted as fact. Is that consciousness is the one thing, the only thing that doesn't appear within our observable reality. Meaning it does not exist. Exist means to stand out. Ex istare, to stand out. So consciousness is the one thing that does not exist. In the same way that the canvas on which a painting is painted doesn't appear in the painting, and yet it's present in the entire painting. But when you look at a painting, you're not looking for the canvas. You don't see a canvas when you're looking at a painting, and yet the canvas is the only thing that is present in the entire painting. We look at the individual elements that's being depicted in the painting, but we don't notice the canvas. Now, what if consciousness is just like that? It's the awareness upon which everything appears, or everything appears within consciousness. But it's the only thing we'll never be able to find. We'll never be able to find it. Never. Whenever you watch this video, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they will still not have found it. They won't. Because it's the only thing that doesn't appear within this appearance, the maya, the illusory reality. Because it can't. Because the canvas can't appear in the painting. A movie doesn't appear in the movie. The movie is the movie. Some ways of looking at it. So where is it? It's not anywhere. And because it's not located anywhere, it doesn't have physical attributes. It's not big or small. It's not light or dark. It's nowhere. And if it's nowhere and has no location, it has to be everywhere. Universal. If it has no physical attributes, it has no size. Therefore it's infinite, infinite, meaning not finite, meaning has no edges, no limits. Infinite. And if it has no physical attributes, it's not subject to the limitations of time. Because time is something that appears within the appearance. So it's eternal. And you are this. Undeniably so. You are conscious right now, are you not? I am, therefore I am. You must be aware of your experience, otherwise you wouldn't be able to hear my words. And as we've just walked through, the consciousness that is aware of my words right now is infinite, universal, and eternal. So relax. So what's to be done then about this body and mind? What about this life, this world? Don't worry about it. It's all automatically unfolding anyway. Just don't worry about it. Enjoy the show. It's about the best advice I can give. Just enjoy the show. Enjoy the ride. You'll be a lot happier when you realise that this one body and mind that you're currently experiencing isn't the end of it. That's not the last of it. You don't just get one go. You know, it's like in a computer game, you get many lives. Same character, many lives. Okay, think of it a little bit like that. And each time, you know, your character goes through another run, you know, many lives. Keeps going through, keeps going through, keeps going through. You learn a bit more and the character gets stronger. It's more resilient, learns more, knows more, and therefore can enjoy the game more and gets further each time. Until one day you go all the way. Why not make it this one? Why not make it this attempt? Go all the way through to the end. The only way a character could ever truly beat the game is to realise that it's a character. It's the only way that a character in a computer game could ever truly win. Because if it never realises that, it's stuck on a loop. But if the character realised, hang on a minute, I'm in a game, the game ends. Why not end the game? Don't worry about it. Just become aware, become self-aware, see what's happening. Sometimes, at the end of computer games, you have the option now with all of your skills, all of the new stuff, that you've got all of this infinite power that you have. Sometimes the game then gives you free rein to go back through the entire game again and go revisit levels. Revisit a level, but at your higher power, right? Maybe that's one way to start enjoying life post-awakening. There's no harm in experiencing things, just do it from this higher perspective. I think that's everything, team. Yeah, I think that's everything. It has to be everything, because nothing can happen outside of consciousness. So that really is everything. Thank you so much for watching, team. Whack like and subscribe on the way out if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'm sure we'll have some amazing discussions in the comments. Let's go for it. Let's have at it. This type of video always has the best discussions in the comment section. It's like the Reddit of YouTube. Anyway, take care, be well, and stay present.